How are you?
I'm great, thanks, Josh. How are you?
Really, really good. I look forward to all of my interviews, and I'm looking forward to this one just as much. I think your story is fascinating, and I'm really looking forward also to tapping into your sort of long history in the space of talent, your passion for the future workforce as well. So thanks so much for joining.
Pleasure. Well, what a build-up. I'll try not to disappoint. But yeah.
I'm sure you won't. Hey, I wanted to kick off. When we first met, you were living in Singapore. You're in Portugal now, which we'll explore now. You're in Singapore with Microsoft. You've been there for 10 years. I'd known you for a little while, and then one day you said, "Oh, come and meet me out near where I live." And I said, "Oh, where's that?" And you said, "Oh, at this marina." Well, that's a little bit unusual. Turned out you lived on a boat. So tell us a little bit about living on a boat.
Well, I'll try and keep it brief. But essentially, I'm from the UK originally, and I set off on a journey. I was going to go on a 1-year round the world trip, and that extended into well, I haven't been back to the UK apart from Christmas visits for the last 17 years. So it was something that my ex-husband and I at the time were just passionate about, sailing and just living an alternate lifestyle. And as we travel more and more, just meeting people from all walks and backgrounds. And the only conversation we had was never around, oh, where do you come from? And, what do you do? It was always about the journey that people had taken. And so that for me was firstly really refreshing, but also just fascinating, because you got to hear some wonderful, wonderful stories. We never had a TV. I haven't had a TV for 17 years. Because why did you need to when there's these amazing people around you to sit, discuss, debate into the small wee hours? So coming into Singapore was just part of that journey, because I'd been in Australia previously for about 6 years, still living on my boat, had my son. So my child's only ever lived on a boat. And we figured at the time we should continue on this round the world journey, because it was now kind of into its, well, at least its 6th, 7th year. Yeah. And so Singapore seemed to be that first opportunity to get into and explore Asia. And people at the time called it like the Asia Light. People spoke English language, which was a great advantage. So I literally sailed into there on the 23rd of December. And having been out on the water for months and months and months, came into Singapore, and if anybody knows Vivo, the largest shopping centre in Singapore, just became absolutely overwhelmed by people and the hustle and bustle and the smells and complete sensory overload. But cut a long story short, found Singapore to have plenty of opportunities, and I've been working in outplacements back in Australia, which is helping people who've been made redundant transition and find new employment. So I tried my own skills on myself and landed myself a contract at Microsoft. And but continued living on the boat. And the reason for that was I just found the lifestyle absolutely addictive. I love the fact that I can be really minimalist. So if ever I'm purchasing something, I'll buy one thing and then I'll make sure that I'm throwing something else away. I'm at any one point, I can just go and take off and be out on the water. And if things really came to it, I could essentially survive by living on a boat, out on the water, fishing, as long as I had enough rice and enough wine and a homebrew kit. I could survive.
I can imagine, I mean, you've sold it to me, but I can imagine that, it's in the corporate world and in the general sort of rush of life, it's so hard it can be really hard to keep a clear head. And we all go through periods where we sort of lose maybe a little bit of sight of what's most important to us. But I can imagine going home to the water must actually really help you stay centered and sort of focused on what's most important and keep that clear head around what you value most. Is that fair? Is it an overstatement?
I would say that's very, very true. I mean, there's all sorts of scientific research done about water purifying the air around you. You did feel that you were in this little pocket of nature, and it was even more so living back in Australia, because I was actually living in the middle of a river, and I'd have to get on a dinghy to get into work. And I would remember leaving the boat as a dirty yachty And as I got on my way to work, becoming, corporate, makeup going on, turning up into the office, and then at the end of the day, the same transformation, but progressing back into dirty yachty phase. I love it. For me, it's very addictive. And also, you may gather, I'm actually quite an extrovert, so I love talking to people and love hearing their stories. And in those communities, there are some real characters.
For a long time, you've had your corporate kind of sphere, bubble, so to speak, and then you've got this other aspect to your life of other people who you just wouldn't have met or been exposed to or influenced by. I can imagine that's been a really, to use a term, a really human element of living.
And I would just say, when I joined Microsoft, it was almost as if I kind of found my home. And the reason I say that is because Microsoft always believes, come as you are, be as you are, and embraces people from every walk, life, culture, background, wherever you are. And so I found it was an organization where I could, be the boat lady and use that in the way that I worked. So I would do onboarding with the team, and I'd bring all the team out on the boat, and we'd go out sailing. And then when they were leaving the team, offboarding, we do the same thing.
That's amazing. You've inspired me, and I think what it's also done from us talking more recently is inspired a real sense of sustainability. And there's I think a track through your sort of experience around traveling the road, less traveled, or taking the route less traveled. So we'll come back to that, or maybe explore it a little bit in the sense of you grew up, I think, an hour or two out of London. But what I found really interesting is your schooling, going to a public school, which in countries like Australia and elsewhere are private schools, which is a privilege, as we've discussed, and not something everyone has access to. But it was a boys' boarding school in Cambridge. So as in England, right? So as almost as traditional and old school as anyone can possibly imagine. So you joined this boys' institution of education as a young girl, and continued your education there. Tell us a little bit about that and how you think that influenced you.
I've been going to a mixed co-ed comprehensive back in my hometown for years, and was really, really happy there. Loved it. And one of my hobbies at the time, and still is music. So I used to play the clarinet, used to play the saxophone, and was always in various different bands. And so during the summer, my parents thought it'd be a great idea. Let's send her to, summer camp. And during that time, I met people outside of my school environment, and they were living all around the country and were going to very, very different schools. And one thing I noticed was the group that I ended up hanging out with couldn't wait to go back to school at the end of the summer. They talked so enthusiastically about their experiences as boarders, the lifestyle, and having grown up on an education of Enid Blyton books, I was like, oh wow, this sounds so exciting. And I remember coming back to my parents and saying, Mum, I really want to go to a boarding school, which had previously always been used as a threat. So we went and saw a couple of schools, and the Leeds was the one that I went to. And at the time, so they were just taking girls in the sixth form. So there's only 15 of us in our year. And it was just such a wonderful experience. And the friendships I made during that time are so solid. I'm still in touch with so many of those people from those times. It was probably the first time as well that I decided to take a different course in life. It had always been expected that I would continue on in, the direction that I was going in my local school. But suddenly here I was at 15 going, this is my decision. I want to go here. This is my direction. Unfortunately, my parents were able to support that. And I'm so glad it did, because obviously, it made me who I am today.
It must have been quite empowering to make that decision, be lucky enough to be supported, and that must have had this sort of influence on you to say, actually, I can make decisions, and they can be good decisions, and I can keep doing that in life. And that has probably encouraged, I imagine that's encouraged you to do things like, we're not going to live in a house, we're going to live in a boat. Which brings me to our next question, because now you are in a house in Portugal that looks like a boat.
Yes, that's right. That's what I feel.
How has, and I know you haven't been in Portugal for very long, maybe only 4 or 5 months or thereabouts, but how has Portuguese culture influenced you, particularly, I guess, during this pandemic of recent months? What sort of impact has it had on you now and how you approach your life and your work?
Yes, I've only been here, we arrived at the beginning of May. So this country is just wonderful. As you look around, there's so much history, and the buildings here, my phrase from it is they're lovely and crumbly. So, nothing is quite finished, but it brings that just beautiful charm to them. What I feel here is my house does feel like a boat. So I have an area which to me reminds me of like the cockpit in my boat. And if I stand on my doorstep, I can look out onto the Atlantic Ocean. So I've still got that feeling of water all around me. But I think it's just kind of brought out my inner boho, which was always there. That's now coming out in spades. And I'm getting more involved in a lot of like repurposing, recycling. So don't judge me, but dumpster diving is a new hobby.
Oh, but it's dumpster diving.
Context. So in Portugal, every month people, get rid of all their old furniture or chairs. And so because I've just moved, I actually haven't got any furniture at the minute, and we're still waiting for the shipment. So, when somebody leaves a desk outside, brilliant, repurpose it. And there's all these wonderful bric-a-brac stores or markets, and you can just find these most wonderful artifacts. And I would say my partner is able to build anything. So, any piece of wood that we come across, it's like, right, I'm going to build a kitchen out of that, which is actually what he's done. And so it's wonderful to kind of continue that sustainable lifestyle or that minimalist lifestyle, and enjoying fresh local produce that's literally from fields straight to the table. So I'm relishing in all of that.
And so many so many great human skills you're using there, and the creativity, the resourcefulness, having vision, problem solving. I mean, what a great human kind of perspective and I think approach to living and working, and one I think is needed so much more in how we work in our organizations, and how we think about problems we're solving and how we go about them. It's not always about in talent development, it's not always necessarily about going out and finding someone new. It's around who could you upcycle to lack of a better term, who could you develop who has potential?
Not finding something ready-made.
Yeah, who has had a shift in direction or wants a shift in direction. I think there's a lot of that going on at the moment. There are people who have discovered new jobs and careers during the pandemic already. What can we do differently? What have we got? How can we be more resourceful with it? And then obviously linked really, really well to things like the environment and struggles with climate. Such a human approach to living. But I mean, speaking of the future workforce, I know you spent a long time with early career talent and looking at the future workforce through that sort of lens, and now a little bit less out of the early career talent space, but definitely looking at the future workforce and involved in talent for Microsoft across Europe and elsewhere. In all of that time, what's been your sort of core philosophy when it comes to talent?
It's a tough question because it changes, it evolves. I think when we've been looking at talent, particularly in early career, it's always been on potential. And role titles, as we know, the role titles that we have today didn't exist a year ago. So to find individuals who have that exact skill set is virtually impossible to do. So what we're doing is looking at the individual. Microsoft operates on growth mindsets and a learning environment. So it's those individuals that are able to display a growth mindset. So they might not know how to do something today, but they'll go and find out a way to go and do it. Or it might be, they're just curious. So they're just asking those questions. So where we're seeing successes in, building our talent into the organization is in an industry example. If we're looking for a technical role, rather than looking for somebody who perhaps has got the Azure skills, the cloud skills, we shift it and look at what they can bring. So they can bring really in-depth industry knowledge. And those skills are something that can only have been built on experience. And then we can teach to that individual the cloud skills and the technical capacity. But I would say when we look at individuals now, it's around their potential and it's around their ability to learn. And also, again, it comes down to passion. So do they want to learn? Are they interested in technology? Are they interested in, how they can support their customer? Are they interested in how they can improve processes using technology? And if they display all of those things, then in theory, they're the right kind of person for the organization.
Yeah, gotcha. This sort of approach has become a lot more common in the tech industry in general, right? The tech industry in general has become a lot more interested in a breadth or a diverse group of talent at all sorts of levels that haven't necessarily got really strong technical skills like the ones you just mentioned, but much more about let's find people who we think have great potential, teach them the tech stuff, and potentially look outside the normal realms of campus recruiting and going to the top 5 universities in a city or a region, actually saying, that's good and worthwhile. Yeah, let's look there, but there's a billion other people out there who might be able to do just as good a job.
Absolutely. And that's why I love the idea of a virtual internship, because that's now has huge accessibility, not just to those who are from privileged backgrounds at the schools that we've always traditionally targeted. It's available to anybody, anywhere.
I think it's such huge potential. The great thing about COVID, if there is some great news coming out of COVID, is the virtualization of work experiences, virtualization of internships, I think is going to move the needle on young people's access to career paths that they just might not have ever have had because, they didn't go to the right school or this university or whatever. Thinking about that in terms of the future workforce more broadly, we undertook a piece of research only last month called the Future Talent Pulse. More than 100 organizations around how are they responding to the development of talent coming out of COVID, and to what degree are things changing, and what do they think has changed. And 3 of the big themes that came through in terms of the support the future workforce need now and sort of in the future was continued support around remote working. And there is some talk about this, particularly younger generations being quite well prepared to work from home because they've kind of been doing it for a little while now. But that transition to work is still a really big one and shouldn't be ignored. The second one being building a sense of belonging, and how do you do that when everyone's at home? And belonging being a real human need people have in order to be able to connect and perform. And particularly with the increase in diversity of workforces, how do I feel I belong? And now I'm at home, I can't even talk to anyone. And then the third one being around supporting people's sort of mental wellness and mental well-being. Let's leave remote working aside. There's so much discussion around remote working out there at the moment. Let's focus on the other ones, on belonging. What are your thoughts around the belonging piece, and how do we help people feel like they belong while they're working at home now and maybe for a long time to come as well?
Yeah, it's interesting. And as you mentioned, I've just recently moved out of the university space, but back at the beginning of the year, we were putting together our first virtual internship program.
Yep.
And we've always run that in person, in country. And so we had to do a switch into bringing that into a virtual experience. So it was something that we really looked at, because we found that our interns coming in, felt that they had a sense of community because there was other interns around them. They had the university recruiters who were there to support them. And so we had to think intentionally around how do we feel, well, I guess rather than them coming to Microsoft, we were now trying to bring Microsoft to them in their homes. And so we were working with our hiring managers to think about how could they work with their interns to deliver a piece of work that, essentially they're probably going to have to do quite independently. Then we were thinking about, what are those touch points? So where we might have the business being extremely busy and not able to give that kind of one-on-one support, whereas previously they might have had it just by being in close proximity. We felt in the university recruitment team that we had to find some way to connect more with those individuals. So we were setting up like discussions with our leaders, which we call like virtual cafes. We were also setting up discussions where there was no agenda. And it was a replacement for, you know, where you would go and hang out and go and meet and chat and talk rubbish, you know, to find a replacement for that, because we could no longer do that in a social environment. And the major change for us was we'd always run what we called Intern Learning Week, which is where we brought all the students from across Asia Pac into one location, and they had this incredible week of intense learning, but obviously, you know, just building up those community networks. So, you know, how are we going to deliver this? And we couldn't have people sat behind a desk online for 8 hours at a time. We knew that that wasn't sustainable in terms of learning. So it could no longer be a week. So we had to change the name. And so we called it Evolve, because it was a, you know, complete involvement in the way that we were working. We looked at how we could bring those groups together, how we could make those groups, you know, work with peers who were based out in, say, Hong Kong, who were based out in New Zealand. So we were able to still build those broad connections. And I guess one of the experiences I've had from belonging is we practice a lot of those meetings where there isn't an agenda. I found out a lot more about my peers than I would have had we just been attending regular meeting. And whether that be discussions around our favorite food, you know, and then we're inside people's homes, so we're getting to see the kids, the pets, the dogs. So I've learned a lot more about my colleagues and feel that actually I'm a lot closer to them because of that. And that's regardless of where they are around the world.
And do you think that sense of building shared experience will become the norm now?
In my lifetime, it's probably one of the first experiences that we've all experienced around the world. You know, previously when there's been pandemics, it's always been, oh, that's an Asia thing. But now it's everywhere. It's impacting everyone. It is a true global experience. It's
interesting, isn't it? Because the other big issues we thought we needed to deal with that were urgent, and they are climate change, equality, you know, these other big issues, and they still exist and are urgent. And what this, as you say, what this pandemic has done is said, no, actually, this is shared. It is actually literally everywhere. The scientists everywhere agree. There is no debate between, although some parts of some countries, sure, but it is a very tangible, isn't it? A very real world. It's had a very real world impact. I mean, even if you still thought the virus didn't exist, if your country is in lockdown, it's in lockdown and you are impacted. Mm-hmm. Period. Like it is the shared experience is there whether you want it, whether you want it or not. And so I think maybe what you're saying there is in terms of creating a sense of belonging is actually to leverage that sense of shared experience. And how do you really maybe help that blossom? How do you really help that grow? What other sort of impacts do you see this having? And let's talk about mental wellness. What sort of support do you think people and talent in the future workforce is going to need from their employers?
The first thing that really springs to mind there is flexibility as well. It's the kind of that distinction between work and home, because that now has completely blended. And I read recently a report, I think we've increased our productivity by something like 32%, because we're no longer commuting. So, you know, that time when we would have had that mental pause and listened to music or read a book or just followed where your route was on the bus, that downtime is no longer happening. So I've been using tools on Teams that have just come in and on my Outlook calendar, where Cortana will actually insert for me breaks. And she inserts for me focus times. Can't say I have them all the time, but it's that really forced reminder. The other thing as well is, certainly in my role, in the manager role, I'm always like checking in with the people that I'm working with. You know, are you okay? Because somebody might have been okay last week, but who knows what's been happening this week? And you know, we kind of thought that we were coming out of this lockdown, and many countries right now are going back in to this, containment time, if you like, and it's really impacting people's mental and well-being. So we certainly, as an organisation, are reintroducing a lot of conversations around well-being, having that in any of our team meetings, and having fun with it as well. So I've got people in my team now who started off wanting to walk and exercise, and where it started off as doing like 5,000 steps a day, now it's like 20,000 steps a day, and that's turned into like a photography hobby, and they're posting fabulous pictures on Instagram. And as soon as I heard that, I was like, right, I need to start walking now. That's a great idea. So I think it's that continuation. People still need to keep talking, and they need to keep sharing, and we need to put that time aside to do that, and just recognize that, yeah, you know, people haven't had a proper holiday. They probably had a staycation at home. You know, the kids are all around us. Luckily, I'm not having to do homeschooling anymore, but that would have sent me off into a deep abyss had that continued any longer. So I'm very grateful that my son is back in school. Kudos to anybody who's a teacher out there.
Conversation around mental wellness has continued to increase because it was advancing. Like in the 18 months prior to the pandemic, particularly in the future workforce space and the early career talent space, the conversation around mental wellness was rapidly gaining pace. The statistics of young people being horrible, and then the corporate world coming to this realization that they're the same people joining your grad programs and your emerging leader programs. Like, they're not different. Those statistics apply in the 200 grads you just brought in last week. And that sort of thing starting to be built into content of programs and the like. And on the belonging side, I think there's been a two sort of things that have really clashed into a perfect storm almost. There's been the increase in diversity of cohorts, which puts belonging on the table. How do you help people feel like they belong so that they can bring their value, but then overlaid with, well, how do I belong in a diverse cohort from home is a different sort of challenge. So I really love what you said around that shared experience, and actually it's forced people to get to know each other a little bit more and have a bit more insight into each other's lives, because maybe that wouldn't have happened. You know, maybe there's a real opportunity here for belonging to increase. I don't know. Thinking about the development of the future workforce and where to from here in terms of how this will all impact how we develop talent and how we develop the future workforce. Do you have sort of thoughts or concerns that are on your mind? I mean, what's going through your head?
Well, I'm going to come back to my point about curiosity and being not a know-it-all, but a learn-it-all. So I think there's so many opportunities for early in career, for, you know, old in career. We need to continue to focus on learning. That's probably one of the major priorities that I have for my team and, you know, for early in career talent as a whole at the moment. And, you know, I see that has changed from, you know, those times back at university where you would sit in a lecture hall for 8 hours with a cup of cold coffee, probably focused more on the coffee than you were actually on the lecturer in front of you. And what I'm seeing now is people are looking for like snack size information. They're looking for nuggets, things that they can consume whilst having a cup of coffee, whilst taking a little bit of downtime at home. Because we haven't got the opportunity to go out and learn, or to sit in front of a screen and learn for 2.5 hours where we might have been in a conference. It's just not happening. I think information needs to be consumed in snack size. Information needs to be obviously very mobile friendly, so it can be used anytime, any place. And I think also people have the power of choice today, so that there's so many options. So one direction on this is to help give individuals guidance on where to find the right path to access the right information to help them get to their career goals. But also, you know, it's just as important that we do have those options, because there's so much information out there, and encourage people to, you know, follow their learning path and learning journeys in areas that excite them, as well as that maybe appropriate for their career at that point.
Do you feel that if there is a day soon or down the track in the future where, for whatever reason, we all go back to offices and training programs, go back to workshops and conferences and large events and the like, do you think the pendulum will swing back to an almost entirely face-to-face work environment and learning environment?
No.
Do you think it'll stay as far down the other end as it is at the moment? I mean, as you know, we deliver a lot of training to the future workforce all around the world. 70,000 graduates and interns and the like in the first 100 days of the pandemic, all over the planet. It's either virtual or digital. Like, there's nothing going on in our business that's face to face at them anywhere, other than tiny little pockets depending on the city or the country. Do you think the pendulum will stay down that end for all of us, or do you think it'll find a middle ground?
There's a lot of surveys. So JP Morgan's produced one, Microsoft have pulled one together, And I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's around the 40% mark of people are very happy working from home and wish to continue that. You know, they've got used to it, they've set up their offices, and, you know, that's great. The percentage of people who wanted to return to kind of like the pure working environment was something around like between 17 and 20%. It was very low. And then again, there was another 40% who were very clearly wanting to have that hybrid situation. So have the option to work from home or work from the office. So having those options to do what works for them. I'm fortunate for the last 9-10 years, I've always been in that flexible environment and I love it. It's great. And for me now, I'm obviously only working from home. And for the most part, I really enjoy it. You know, I'm not sure that I'll be needing to go to the office very much in the future, especially as my team now are scattered across all of EMEA. Not going to be a necessity for me going forward.
It's an interesting conversation, isn't it? Because that mix between how will learning unfold is fairly closely tied in some senses to how will office life, you know, sort of involved. I know for our business, we're reassessing the purpose of the office. You know, personally, I think offices will have their role, but I don't think I see us all heading into the office to be there by 8:30 and then opening our laptops and sitting down and working and not talking to each other, which is the irony of what we used to do. You commute for an hour, roll into the office, and then work. You think, well, we used to do that, didn't we? All right. But we could repurpose. I think there's a real opportunity in the world to repurpose office spaces to learning spaces, collaboration spaces, creativity spaces, where you come together to only do the things that make sense when you're in the room with another human being. And some of the research that we undertook, parallel to some of the surveys you're talking about, definitely see a switch towards, on the learning front, definitely see a switch towards digital and virtual, whether it's split 30-30-30, you know, 33% either way, maybe, but generally, you know, very much less on the face-to-face, much more on the digital, supported by, you know, potentially supported or driven by the virtual type learning. And I think that sort of lines up with most of the surveys, like you're talking about, the JP Morgan, Microsoft, etc., about what people see in their work life. Hey, look, thanks so much for joining us. We're going to wrap it up. I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, as I knew we would. We're going to finish with top 5 questions about Anna.
Oh gosh.
So I'm going to put you on your feet here. First question. What music, performer or band inspires you most?
I'm going to say Pink Floyd.
Oh, classic.
They're so like multi-generational.
Yeah.
You know, they're such talented artists.
That's awesome. Most influential book you've read? It's
usually the last book I've read. And
you must be good at reading books.
Yeah, so I listen to them on Audible. And the last book I've just read was, I can't remember the exact title now, it's called Sleep. And it discusses the importance of sleep. And particularly, obviously, in these times, it's really relatable. And, you know, it's discussing that, you know, as grown adults, we should be having 7 hours sleep per day. And the impact of us not having that sleep, how this affects the productivity of the workforce, productivity of, or the ability for us to make decision making, and also the ability for us to learn. So they're talking about, you know, if you go in and read and absorb, you know, learning over a period of time, which gets absorbed here in the frontal hippocampus, and then if you don't go and take sleep after that learning, what that allows you to do, the sleep takes it out of the forward drive, or the, you know, the hard drive, and then puts it into your long-term memory. And if that doesn't happen, your ability to take on more information clogs up. There's no more space. So just the power and the importance of sleep at any stage of your life, obviously the 2 different types of sleeps. So it's been a fascinating read, and as I've been going through chapters, I've been relaying, you know, what I've learned during that particular chapter to anybody who listens, actually, to the extent that my son's been going, no, not again, no, not a sleep book, I don't need to sleep.
I'm going to sleep. Back off. I'll have to look it up. If you could have dinner with one person, who would it be? Dead or alive?
My thought on that is, why one person when you can have a full dinner party? So
the question is one person, Anna. That's why. So who's at the dinner party? Who's at the table?
Dinner party. I would be inviting George Clooney, obviously, and his amazing wife. You know, what a pair of interesting partnership and the work that they're doing in human rights. Barack Obama and Michelle, I think, would make a lovely contribution to the conversation.
Probably got some things to say. Yep.
Absolutely. And then I'd have Satya Nadella and his wife.
Who?
Satya Nadella, our CEO at Microsoft.
Oh, how good.
And his wife.
What a power dinner.
Oh my God. I mean, can you just imagine the diversity of the conversation and, you know, how that could extend far and wide?
Yeah.
So if they're listening, dinner at mine on Saturday.
Can I wait? Can I wait her? Can I clean up? I'll just come in and out of the room, kind of clear plates and stuff. Let me know. If you could change one thing in the world, what would it be?
Great question. And where do you go with this? I think kind of coming back to my experience living on the water. So having sailed across the oceans and coming into these beautiful tropical islands, and then stepping onto the beach and not being able to step on the beach because they are covered in plastic. They're covered in baby nappies. The filth and the dirt is just, and it's coming in from our oceans. So if I could have a magic wand, it would be around how can we, you know, stop our use of plastics, or how can we, you know, capture that plastic and reuse them into something else. So, you know, I'm regularly doing beach cleans. I'm loving the fact that Microsoft are working on making Microsoft into not only carbon neutral, but carbon negative by 2030. And we've just announced recently the work that we're going to do with water. So all the sites that we're building are water neutral as well. But yeah, so when I grow up, that's something that I'll be pursuing around reducing plastic out in the oceans.
There are few people who would have seen as much plastic in oceans and water and beaches as you, Anna, I can imagine. Finally, what are you most proud of?
Do you know, I think it's going to be, I remember attending one of my intern learning weeks, probably like a couple of years ago. And we had all our past interns who are now, you know, graduates in our organization, been there a number of years. And as they were standing up in front of our newest group of interns, they were all describing who they were and, you know, a little bit about their backgrounds. And they all stood up there at the front and went, so hi, my name's Kshitij, and Anna hired me back in whenever it was. Next person. Hi, my name is so-and-so, and, you know, I joined Microsoft and Anna hired me back in so-and-so. And so that gave me these like overwhelming feelings of like, you know, love for my interns, and, you know, my nickname has always been the fairy godmother. The more important part of what I'm proud of is just how they have grown and what they have achieved. And, you know, coming in with that curious mindset and willingness to learn. And now here they are as leaders, senior leaders within our organization or within external organizations. They're so bright, they're so smart, and I'm so proud of what they've achieved.
That's what a great response. You and I share such a passion for the development of young people. What a fantastic space. Thanks so much for your time, Anna.